How important is disaster, contingency, and risk planning for you and your business now? In late 2019, this mysterious new virus appeared in China. Quickly, it had been named the coronavirus and often referred to as COVID. By February 2020, it had hit the United States. By mid to late March, most cities across the United States and in most of the world were in lockdown. Many businesses were caught totally unprepared for this. Millions of Americans found themselves unemployed, and millions of companies have gone out of business. I was one of those who found themselves unemployed. I immediately started writing a business book to address the crisis, share what I was seeing, and predict the future of business. This free book was published in July 2020 and was made available online immediately. The title is Business 2020, The Business World After COVID-19. You can request your free copy at https://bit.ly/getbusy2020. Chapter 5 of my book discussed the need for businesses to invest in some type of preparedness planning. The reason the book was free is because I wanted businesses to access it without difficulty. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2021, Texas was hit with a massive winter storm. People were prepared for a couple days of cold weather and some snow and ice. The predictions were off. The power companies across the state of Texas and the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, also known as ERCOT, were also caught unprepared. The result was throttling power back to homes across Texas and leaving over 4 million people without power. The storm continued for days, and many went without power, water, and internet. Then the food and drinking water shortages began. Stores opened for limited hours, some even without power, and had very long lines. Consumers that could make it out found the shelves bare of things like meat, water, bread, and, of course, toilet paper. After 21 years in the military and 7 years as a war planner, I fully understand the importance of risk mitigation through disaster and contingency planning. There are many that have told me that there was no way to plan for the pandemic. And there will be many that will say there was no way to prepare for these Texas winter storms. But they are wrong. In 2016, my wife and I purchased a 100-acre horse property just north of San Antonio, Texas. We opened up an equestrian business called Fine Print Farms and started taking boarders and training clients by November of that year. Two major things can happen in the Texas Hill Country: flooding and freezing. Because we stood up a veterans equitherapy program and worked with the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship, also known as PATH, we had to have risk management plans in place. As we reviewed the PATH requirements, we realized that we needed a written plan. We identified the two major threats that were most likely to occur and created a farm checklist for each of them. Needless, we use these checklists every year. When the threat of coronavirus became apparent, my wife and I pulled out our plan and our two checklists. Quickly, we created a separate checklist that identified steps for us to take to prepare for the eventual pandemic. We went a little overboard and thought there might be a shortage of fuel and a run on banks. So we were a little over-prepared as we filled up all of our vehicles and fuel containers and pulled out a bunch of money from the bank in cash. You can't always prepare for everything, and we never predicted the run on toilet paper, but our checklist ensured that we still prepared with ample supplies. The result, Fine Print Farms is busier now than it has ever been. Planning ahead and being prepared ensured that we never missed a beat, and we were able to stay open for hundreds of people wanting an escape from being locked up in their homes and apartments. Again, when the Texas winter storms were predicted, we pulled out our checklist. Supplies were purchased, vehicles fueled up, and everything was ready. As the weather started to arrive Sunday afternoon, predictions started to change. Businesses started closing early, and the state started to realize that this was going to be worse than expected. By 6:30 p.m. that night, CPS Energy, our power company, started initiating rolling blackouts across the city. Our first was from 6:30 to 9:30. And our second blackout was from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Without power, those blackouts froze our wells and our water lines. The next day, we awoke to about 5 inches of snow on the ground. The temperature had dropped to 6 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. Although we had one more rolling blackout on Monday, our power stayed on for the rest of the week. Others were not as fortunate. But by Monday morning, all the damage was done. We had no water on the property for a week. Now you might think this was a concern. After all, we have close to 40 horses on property and no way to get them water. Horses typically drink 5 to 10 gallons of water a day. But we plan for this possibility. If we ever lose our well and need to get water to the horses, we simply pull the water from our pool. So, for several days, we used pool water to flush our toilets and water the horses. Sure, it was a lot of work, but you do what you have to. And it was much easier to do when we were prepared. So why did we just spend 8 minutes talking about coronavirus, Texas storms, and how Fine Print Farms responded to these challenges? Because you can indeed plan for these situations, even if you can't plan for everything. The rest of this presentation is a step-by-step guide to creating your own plan. I'm sharing this so that you and your business can be prepared for whatever curveballs are thrown at you. If you desire assistance with building your preparedness plans, contact me at john.knotts@crossctr.com. Building a plan to mitigate risks, respond to disasters, and handle any contingency is relatively easy. The hardest part is actually putting it together into a document. The time is now to build a plan that will prepare you for the next crisis, and I'm going to help you do this. This is going to follow a simple yet effective 5-step process. We are going to do the following 5 things. 1. Ensure everyone is on the same page before we start the planning process. 2. Identify the potential risks to you and your business. 3. Then we're going to prioritize these risks to determine which we should focus on first. 4. In this step, we will determine how we will respond to the risks of the highest priority. 5. And last, we will document these in a plan and checklist So let's get started. The first step to developing a strong plan to manage and respond to risks is to get everyone on the same wavelength, to level set everyone. This requires open, honest, and transparent communication. Too often, business leaders want to hold all their cards close to their vest. They feel that they are protecting people by not involving them. However, to really be effective, you want as much input as you can get. The question is, who do you level set with, right? The answer is everyone possible. Internally, you want to involve everyone in the organization, or at least a cross-section of leaders, managers, and employees, and even contractors. But if you can, engage your suppliers, partners, and even your customers to be even better. This makes sure that you have a full stakeholder engagement. You accomplish this step by arranging a large kickoff meeting and inviting as many stakeholders as possible. If you need more than one meeting, so be it. In the meeting, describe the challenges your company has had in the past and the problems this has caused. Identify the 5 steps that you are going to follow and how you would like their involvement. Describe the end deliverables that you expect and how they will be used. By getting others involved early and often in this process, it will help you get as many ideas as possible and build buy-in towards the final product. It will be a whole lot easier to get people to implement and follow these plans and checklists if they were involved in creating them. The second step is establishing from all your stakeholders a cross-functional group. This will be your team that leads the effort of identifying potential risks, prioritizing them in step 3, and determining ways to mitigate the risks in step 4. Develop a way to survey the rest of your stakeholders as you go through this process. This can be done using tools like SurveyMonkey, holding focus groups, or simply through email. As you go through this effort, you want as much input and review as possible. Then you can use one of 2 different approaches to identify potential risks that need to be dealt with. These 2 approaches are scenario planning and silent brainstorming. You can choose to use both approaches to get the most input. Scenario planning is something that I like to use with any planning activity. When I worked with Booz Allen Hamilton, we built scenarios with our wargaming department. Essentially, we are what-ifing your current situation to look at possible risks. When scenario planning, try to keep the scenarios realistic. Also, keep scenarios rather generic. Typically, you wouldn't create a pandemic scenario, but you might create a natural disaster or government shutdown scenario. Make sure the scenarios that you create fit your current situation. If you want them to be plausible, provided here on the slide are 7 ideas, and these are explained in detail in my free book. When I do strategic planning, I normally only select 3 of the most viable scenarios. However, in this type of planning, you should have several to ensure that you cover several situations. With your scenarios designed, bring your group together to discuss them. Present a scenario, discuss what might be good about it, the opportunities, and what might be bad about it, the risks. Don't worry about talking about how you would handle the risks just yet. We still need to prioritize everything that we create. The other way to gather potential risks is to use a structured silent brainstorming activity. This is an organized event where your cross-functional team comes together to formally identify potential risks. Prior to the event, put together a list of broad topic areas that you would want the team to brainstorm around. In my free book, I give several examples, but they could be things like disasters, a customer crisis, or personnel conduct. You don't want to have too many topics, or this event could take a long time. Give all the participants Post-it notes and pens. Give them about 10 to 15 minutes to write down any risk or threat that might be associated with the specific topic. As they come up with items, you group like items, this is called affinity diagramming, and put them together on the wall. The idea is to get as many ideas as possible. Then you clean up your list and get ready for step 3. Now that you have a solid list of potential risks, you're ready to evaluate them. Essentially, as a team, you will prioritize each and every risk with a very simple scoring method. Make a list of every risk. Next to the list of risks, have a column for likelihood and for consequence. You can score these as a team, coming to consensus on each score, or you can have each team member score these risks themselves, and you can tabulate total scores and average them out for each risk later. Likelihood is measuring how likely the risk might happen. Consequence rates how bad things could get if the risk were to happen. See the categories and levels with definitions on the slide. Note that each level has a corresponding score. This will be used to compare each risk. With every risk rated, you simply multiply the likelihood score against the consequence score. Something that is very unlikely to occur and only creates a minor annoyance would be very low risk. A risk that is very likely to occur and could result in extreme consequences like death or permanent injury would score as a very high risk. The purpose of this step is to quickly assess a value on every potential risk that you have identified. You might have a long list of risks, but with solid scores associated, you know what to evaluate and mitigate first, and which risks you might simply ignore. When I help businesses create a preparedness plan, I establish a numerical cutoff point. Some high risks might only be likely during certain times of the year, so you might want to focus on them, but at a later point. For instance, in the spring, you might want to put off focusing on winter risks. Now that you have a short list of top risks, your team can review each one, discuss them, and devise ways to mitigate them. The first thing is to determine how to detect the risk before it actually happens. For freezing weather, we use the weather forecast and watch for freezing temperatures coming our way. If you can't detect something before it actually happens, it's harder to prepare for it. Then you determine ways that you can get ahead of the risk to prevent it from causing too much damage. When it comes to a freeze, obviously wrapping pipes, stocking up on supplies, and keeping faucets dripping are just some of our precautionary measures. Some risks that you have identified could be avoided altogether, which can make the risk essentially go away. Most risks, however, can't go away, and they certainly can happen, like freezing weather. No matter what you do, it's still going to happen. So the next thing to create is a plan for what you will do when it happens. On our farm, we realized that we can lose power and our well won't work. or the well can just fail. We haven't put in an backup generator yet due to the expense, but we have a swimming pool on property, and we can use the water in it until the well is working again. Based on the level of effort required to evaluate each risk, you can see why we prioritize them. This ensures you focus on the most important risks first. The last step, which is the most time-consuming, is to fully document your plan. You want to make sure that you describe your current situation, outline the approach that you followed, and list all the identified risks with their scoring. Just because you may never have addressed some risk doesn't mean that you don't want to document them. Your plan will show people in the future what effort was done in this area. For your top risks, consider creating checklists if needed. As I shared at the start of this presentation, we have 2 checklists that we use. This way, we never miss anything when those issues arrive. If we realize we've missed something as we're implementing the checklist, it's added to the checklist for future situations. When the plan's done, communicate it and share it with everyone. People need to know what their roles are should something happen. New employees should be made aware of the plan. Plus, the plan should be reviewed once a year and updated as required. So all this might seem like a lot of work, but it's very valuable. You won't even realize how important this planning activity is until something bad happens and you realize how prepared you were because you planned for it. Of course, now that you have a plan, make sure that you use it to take action. Otherwise, this would all be a wasted effort. If you need help building and documenting your preparedness plan, contact me. You can check out my coaching and consulting company at www.crosscutter.com, or you can email me directly at john.knotts@crosscutter.com. Good luck with your preparedness planning.